The hearing will come to order. The subcommittee meets today to review Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps combat aviation programs in the fiscal year 2019 budget request. I would like to welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses. We have Vice Admiral Paul Grosklags, Commander of the Naval Air Systems Command, Lieutenant General Stephen Rudder, Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Aviation, Rear Admiral Scott Conn, Director of the Navy's Air Warfare Division, Lieutenant General Arnold Bunch, Military Deputy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, and Lieutenant General Jerry Harris, Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans, Programs, and Requirements. I want to thank all of you for your service, and we look forward to your testimony here today. This hearing continues the subcommittee's ongoing oversight of combat aviation modernization. It represents the third hearing of the subcommittee that we've held this year alone on this topic. Last year, when the subcommittee held this hearing on the fiscal year 2018 budget request, we heard how years of continuous combat operations and deferred modernization had created a crisis in military readiness. The balanced budget agreement signed by the President in February and the fiscal year 2018 Consolidated Appropriations Act will help us provide much-needed stability and relief. Combined with the fiscal year 2019 budget request, the military services should be able to begin digging out of this hole. Our witnesses today have been asked to identify their top 5 modernization requirements for the combat aviation portfolio and briefly summarize how this budget request helps to restore full spectrum readiness. We also expect the witnesses to articulate how these requirements are aligned with the goals and objectives of the new National Defense Strategy. We expect to examine a broad range of issues today that I'll highlight later in this statement, but I first want to address some issues brought to my attention by F-35 pilots and maintainers at Hill Air Force Base, where I traveled last week. These pilots were very concerned about their visual acuity during night refueling operations using the F-35 pilot helmet and described the issue as a safety issue. The pilots also stated that the Navy pilots conducting night aircraft carrier landings in the F-35C and Marine Corps F-35B conducting night landings on amphibious ships had a similar safety concern. The maintenance personnel are still very disappointed in the autonomic logistics information system, or ALICE. They continue to have to use manual worksheets and workarounds that take time and effort, resulting in lower aircraft availability and mission capable rates, and they also reported that they're not standardized. I'd like for each of the witnesses to address how these concerns relate to their areas and strongly urge each of you to work with the F-35 program office to get these items fixed. And I'll just briefly touch on a few other key issues that we expect to cover this afternoon. Regarding F-35A production, the subcommittee would like to better understand the rationale for this year's F-35A request, which amounts to 48 aircraft, and why there is no real significant increase given last year's underfunded requirement for 14 additional aircraft. General Harris, who testified before the subcommittee last year and stated that, quote, the Air Force needs to increase F-35A procurement to a minimum of 60 aircraft per year as quickly as possible, end quote. I would also note that 3 years ago, the Air Force planned to procure 60 35As in fiscal year 2019. Regarding physiological episodes, we continue to be concerned by the increased rate of physiological episodes occurring in Navy and Air Force aircraft. We recognize that work is being done to mitigate these events, but remain concerned about the overall progress that is made in determining a root cause. This is a good opportunity for the witnesses to provide some detail as to how this budget request supports mitigation efforts. Regarding aviation readiness and strike fighter inventories, it is my understanding the Navy continues to absorb risk in its management of the strike fighter inventory. I understand the Navy has submitted a request for FA-18 multi-year procurement authorization, which, if authorized, should make the procurement of Super Hornets more efficient and less costly. Last year, the Navy and Marine Corps continue to fall short of the number of ready basic aircraft. We'll look to better understand what efforts are currently underway to mitigate potential strike fighter shortfalls and improve readiness. Regarding training aircraft, the subcommittee continues to have concerns regarding the overall age of the training aircraft fleet. I believe that if we're fielding 5th-generation aircraft, then we should be fielding a 5th-generation trainer. I look forward to hearing an update on the Air Force's next-generation trainer, the TX program. Regarding munitions, while everyone on the committee is pleased to see many critical munition programs are being kept at maximum production in the budget request, I'm concerned that years of underinvestment has created shortfalls in munition inventories that are being exacerbated by current operations. We need to better understand the challenges you currently face with managing munition programs as well as this critical industrial base. And finally, let there be no doubt that we are experiencing a crisis in military readiness and that we must address now. More U.S. military service members have died recently in aircraft mishaps over the past year than have died while serving in Afghanistan. Over the last 3.5 weeks, we have witnessed a series of aviation accidents where 16 service members have tragically lost their lives. One of those service members was a constituent of mine. Gunnery Sergeant Derek Holley was a 33-year-old enlisted Marine, and he was killed while conducting training missions in CH-53E helicopter, a helicopter that has been in service since the 1970s. Many of these tragic events are a result of lack of training hours due to constrained resources and/or the current state of aging equipment, all of which resulted from years of underfunding our military and clearly shows the magnitude of the problem that we're dealing with. This is why we have fought so hard to raise the department's top-line budget request. We have to do whatever it takes to ensure that our aircraft are safe and that pilots get the training they need. Before we begin with witness statements, I would like to turn to my good friend and colleague from Massachusetts, Ms. Nikki Songus, for comments that she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. Good to have you with us today. I'd like to thank you for being here today to answer questions about the fiscal year 2019 budget request for Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps aviation-related programs. Taken together, these programs constitute the largest amount of funding in the DoD's procurement and research budgets, so it's important to review them carefully. Overall, it appears that most aviation programs for the three services are well funded. The performance of these programs are, however, more of a mixed story, with some programs performing well and some running into difficulties. Before we get into our witnesses' statements and member questions, I did want to touch on a few issues of note. First, the issue of high rates of physiological episodes, which Chairman Turner has referenced, continues to be a challenge, particularly for the Navy's F-18 fleet. Recently, similar issues have come up regarding other aircraft, including some operated by the Air Force. The Navy recently provided an update to Congress on its efforts in this area, and I am encouraged by the amount of upgrade efforts underway and the significant progress on T-45 event rates. However, I remain concerned that event rates for the F-18 remain well above acceptable levels. Hopefully, the many efforts to upgrade airframes that are underway will improve the situation soon. In the meantime, the committee must decide how to proceed with a request from the Navy to enter into a 3 to 5 year multi-year contract for F-18 aircraft starting in fiscal year 2019. Before committing billions of additional dollars to the F-18, I want to make sure we fully understand the path to reducing physiological event rates to acceptable levels. Second, I remain concerned with some aspects of the F-35 program. While production costs are down and the initial development effort is coming to an end, much work remains to be done to get the plane the military needs. Importantly, the detailed schedule and potential cost of the follow-on development, or Block 4, also known as C2D2 effort, is still not known, even though the budget request contains almost $1 billion for this effort. Finally, I'm troubled by the Air Force and Navy's extended problems getting the AIM-120 missile program's production rate up to where we need it to be to meet the demands of potential conflicts. After years of problems with productions of AIM-120 missile motors, the program's production rate is now hobbled by a critical parts obsolescence problem. While I know the DoD is working closely with the contractor to address this issue, the delays to this vital program are of concern. I will have some questions in all these areas and look forward to today's hearing. Thank you, and I yield back.
Admiral Grosklags, please proceed, followed by General Rudder, Admiral Conn, General Bunch, and General Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make an opening statement for the entire department. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Songus, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of myself, Lieutenant General Steve Rudder, Deputy Commandant for Aviation, and Rear Admiral Scott Conn, the Navy's Director of Air Warfare, we thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to address the Department of the Navy's fiscal year 2019 aviation program's budget request. Now, we believe our PB19 request is well aligned with and is supportive of the National Defense Strategy, rebuilding our readiness while building a more lethal force. Our ability to achieve this alignment is greatly facilitated by the additional budget flexibility provided by the recent budget agreement and the recently enacted FY18 budget. The lethality which naval aviation brings to bear in support of our nation's interests will be greatly enhanced by the increased procurement numbers for aircraft and weapons, increased investment in the development of new and advanced capabilities, and increased funding of our critical readiness and sustainment accounts. The need to transform our business and acquisition practices is being directly addressed with investments in agile, accelerated, capabilities-based acquisition, leveraging authorities provided by the Congress in the fiscal year 16 through 18 NDAAs, and investment in Naval Aviation Sustainment Vision 2020, which will leverage commercial tool sets and best practices in making fundamental changes to the processes by which we plan and execute aviation sustainment activities. In support of the National Defense Strategy and to ensure readiness for combat while modernizing and building a more lethal force, specific naval aviation priorities included in the PB-19 request include, for the Marine Corps, F-35 procurement and sustainment, CH-53K development and continuation of low-rate initial production, Marine Air Ground Task Force Unmanned Expeditionary Capability, also known as MUX, MUX, completion of the H-1 upgrades procurement, and maintaining the lethality of our legacy F-18 aircraft. For the Navy, priorities include F-18 Super Hornet service life modernization, and procurement of F-18 Block 3, F-35s, E-2s, P-8s, CMV-22s, and Triton, and development of MQ-25 and our next generation jammer. For both services, a critical priority is full funding to the PB-19 request for all of our aviation readiness accounts, including spares. Now, as both the chairman and the ranking member noted, I would also be remiss if I did not mention our continuing challenge with physiological episodes. This remains naval aviation's top safety concern, and it continues to have our complete attention. While we have made clear progress in some areas, solutions to the broader problem do remain frustratingly slow. In parallel with pursuit of root causes, we are continuing implementation of hardware, software, and procedural mitigations. We are conducting additional flight testing and system characterization. And following NASA's independent review of last year, we have a greatly increased focus on aircrew physiology and the operational environment. Full funding of the PB-19 PE-specific request is critical to continuation of these efforts. In closing, we thank this subcommittee for your efforts in reaching the current budget agreement and for your continuing support of our sailors and Marines. We look forward to answering your questions.
General Bunch.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Tsongas, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about the Air Force's priorities for fiscal year 2019. We appreciate your service and the support the subcommittee provides the United States Air Force, our airmen, and their families. Today, I'm accompanied by Lieutenant General J.D. Harris, Deputy Chief of Staff, Strategic Plans and Requirements. We have prepared a joint statement, and I will provide brief opening remarks, but I would ask that the full statement be entered into the official record. For the past 70 years, the Air Force has been breaking barriers as a member of the finest joint warfighting team on the planet through the evolution of the jet aircraft to the advent of the ICBM satellite-guided bombs, remotely piloted aircraft, and development of satellites. In the same time frame, your Air Force has also secured peace by providing decisive warfighting advantage in, through, and from air, space, and cyberspace. Today's demand for Air Force capabilities continues to grow as the United States now faces a more competitive and dangerous international security environment than we have seen in many generations. The fabric of our Air Force weaves multi-domain effects and provides joint warfighters the blanket of protection and ability to project power, America's full range of combat capabilities. We are always there. Today's 670,000 active duty Guard, Reserve, and civilian airmen meet these challenges by defeating our adversaries, deterring threats, and assuring our allies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. With global trends and intensifying pressure from major challengers, our relative advantage in air and space is eroding in a number of critical areas. We are supporting combatant commander requirements in response to growing challenges from Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, in addition to ever-present counterterrorism mission in the Middle East and around the world. In accordance with the new National Defense Strategy, this year's budget request prioritizes long-term competition with China and Russia. The Air Force must build a more lethal and ready force, strengthen alliances and partnerships, and deliver greater, more affordable performance. Future wars will be won by those who observe, orient, decide, and act faster than adversaries in an integrated way across all domains. With your support of our fiscal year 2019 budget request, the Air Force will drive innovation, reinforce budget discipline, and deliver capabilities with greater affordability at the speed of relevance. The demand for airspace and cyber capabilities is growing, and our Chief is committed to ensuring that America's airmen are resourced and trained to fight alongside our sister services to meet all national security obligations. The Air Force seeks to balance risk across capacity, capability, and readiness to maintain our nation's advantage. I would like to thank the members of this committee for the passage of the fiscal year 2018 budget and the relief of the Budget Control Act restrictions in fiscal year 2018 and 2019. This allows us to relook at some of the tough trade-offs made between force structure, readiness, and modernization. Today's modernization is tomorrow's readiness. Readiness is not static. While our forces have been heavily engaged in deterring or addressing counterterrorism, other adversaries have taken the opportunity to invest in and advance their own capabilities. To address ever-narrowing capability advantages, the Air Force needs your support in the form of steady, predictable, and timely appropriations that fulfill our annual budget requests. The Air Force budget request for 2019 builds on the progress we are making in 2018 to restore the readiness of the force, to increase our lethality, and cost-effectively modernize our top priorities. Sustaining these efforts requires predictable budgets at the requested funding levels. It is critical to ensure we can meet today's demand for capability and capacity without sacrificing modernization for tomorrow's high-end fight against the full array of potential adversaries. Timely funding of our requests allows us to ability to modernize faster, be ready sooner, and be capable of achieving our national defense strategy tasks in a timely manner. You asked us to identify the Air Force's top 5 combat aviation modernization priorities for fiscal year 2019. Today, in this area, the priorities are the traditional big 3 for the Air Force, the F-35, both procurement, to include procurement, sustainment, and modernization, the KC-46 for the role that it plays in being able to power project, and the B-21. The other 2 areas are the next generation air dominance efforts that we are embarking on, and our 4th generation modifications to keep our legacy fleet flyable and viable and more capable. These efforts are key to our ability to answer the nation's call when needed. Like Admiral Grosklags, we are very focused on unexplained physiological events, particularly in the recent T6 incidents, number of increase that we have incurred. We have multiple attack vectors in that area, and I'll be happy to discuss those in more detail. As critical members of the joint team represented here today, the Air Force operates in a vast array of domains and prevails in every level of conflict. However, we must remain focused on integrating airspace and cyber capabilities across all those domains so that we can project power. General Harris and I look forward to answering questions from the committee this afternoon. Thank you for your continued support of the greatest Air Force on the planet.
General Harris, do you have an opening statement? Thank you. Well, gentlemen, I have only one question. And I think it's the most important one of all of the issues that we've been facing. And you don't have to be on the Armed Services Committee, and you don't have to have a uniform on to understand that we have a crisis in aviation mishaps. People are dying. Our chairman has made the statement that it is more risky for a service member in training to be in training and exercises than in combat right now. This needs to be addressed. As I said in my opening statement, we need to make certain our aircraft are safe and that pilots get the training that they need. General Mattis says that we must prioritize rebuilding readiness while modernizing our force. How does the budget that we're looking at for the upcoming year address this issue, and what do we need to be doing, and what will you be doing to address this issue so that we can end the risky nature of these mishaps that are resulting in deaths of our military service members, our men and women? I'll be with you, General Grosklags. Admiral.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, certainly we are very much aware, as you are, of the recent mishap trends. And we're working very hard. Now, each one of those mishaps has to be dealt with on individual unique basis to determine the root cause, and that is certainly our focus on each and every one of those individually to determine the root cause. Along with that, we are certainly using the funding that we have in the fiscal year 18 budget, along with the request in PB19, to focus on those areas that may influence our ability to reduce the mishap rate in the future. We know we need to do that, but again, each one of those mishaps will have a unique cause, and so there's not a universal panacea, if you will, that we can invest money in a certain spot. Things that will help us get after the potential causes are making sure that our maintainers have the tools and the equipment they need to maintain the aircraft to the best of their ability, making sure that the material condition of those aircraft in terms of spare parts and readiness on the flight line is at absolute maximum condition, and making sure that our aircrew have the requisite number of hours to make sure they are trained for the missions that they're being asked to fly. All of those things we will make improvements on based on the additional funding we've received. But again, I can't tie any one of those specific things directly to certainly any of the recent mishaps, which we're still investigating, or even make a direct tie to the mishaps that we have experienced over the last number of years. We try to make those linkages every time we have a mishap, identify the root cause. In many cases we do, in all cases that's not possible, but we continue those efforts. So I guess in wrapping it up, the investments that we're able to make in 18 and 19 will certainly help us rebuild some of the foundational things that we have lost over the last 6 or 7 years. And it is certainly our intent to try and reduce the mishap rate based on those foundational elements.
Admiral, I appreciate your dedication to get to root cause, but I don't buy that it's merely just individual incidences. If you have vehicular accidents that occur at a particular intersection repeatedly, they each have their own story, but at times there's something wrong with the intersection. And at this point, we have an aggregate of these mishaps. I think you go to a systemic issue, not just the isolated instances of which they happen. And I certainly want, as we look to this budget and our oversight, that attention is paid, because this is unprecedented in what we're seeing. General Rudder, your thoughts?
We also are looking at each one of the mishaps, and certainly the last CH-53 Echo mishap hit home as well. I was in Dover last Friday night with the Secretary of the Navy, and that was a tough night for all of us. When we look at all of these mishaps, we too are looking at the hours. And one of the things we're focusing on for 19 is just like we did in 18. We're maximizing our readiness accounts. We're giving maximum amounts to our depots. We're giving maximum amounts to buy spares. We're giving maximum amounts to our program managers so they can fix the airplanes. For the CH-53 Echo in particular, we're still executing our max funds to reset that airplane on both the East and West Coast and in a few other areas in the Pacific and up in Oregon. For the modernization will help us as well, as we are able to, you have graciously given us the funds to be able to not only reset the airplanes themselves, but also buy new and get out of some of these older aircraft. We've seen some positive movement on the hours. In 16, we are at 13.5 average for the Marine Corps and 15.4. And in both February and March, we were at 18.8 and 19.3 as average throughout the Marine Corps. So we're seeing some positive trends, but certainly any type of readiness recovery is fragile. On certainly the devastating ones, Class A, individually, we look at every single mishap and pull apart, and we make the corrective actions. One thing that we've seen, and I think the article brought out, is certainly our Class Cs. We're finding that experience level down in our maintenance departments, and certainly our ops tempo is creating a lot of people towing airplanes into things and doing maintenance practices that may be not in accordance with the experience level we're used to. And we are addressing that, trying to provide more stability with our enlisted manpower down there by giving them re-enlistment bonuses if they have the higher qualifications and stabilizing them in the squadron. For instance, if you're a collateral duty inspector, a collateral duty QAR, or a quality assurance representative now, you have a separate MOS, and if you re-enlist with that designator, you get an extra $20,000 kicker, and you stabilize, you will be in that squadron for another 2 years. So I think as an example, we've had 676 Marines, corporals and sergeants and staff sergeants take that, and now we've stabilized that manpower in the garage. But back to your original point, Chairman, each one of these mishaps is hurting, and we are certainly addressing each one of those mishaps on a case-by-case basis.
John, I appreciate your detailed answer and the passion of which you have about this. Admiral Conn?
Yes, sir. Well, we lost 2 officers off Key West not too long ago. And we can always replace the airplanes, but we can't replace those sons to their families, sons or brothers. So it indeed was a tragic event. Overall, for our Class A and Class B for the last 5 years, it has been relatively stable, although the loss of one life is one too many. And every time we have a mishap, we look hard at what the root causes were. We put the correction actions in place. We educate our people so we do not repeat those mistakes, whether it be a procedural error, a maintenance error, or whatnot. We too have seen, in terms of the rise in mishaps, the majority being to our Class C. And in those Class C, in terms of the analysis by the Naval Safety Center, we're seeing far too many maintenance supervisor and maintenance skill-based errors. We need to get back to the basics in terms of ensuring those sailors know how to fix the airplane. But it's not just fixing airplanes in hangars. It's fixing airplanes on flight lines while you're trying to meet a schedule. And then when you put that flight line on an aircraft carrier with other aircraft turning, aircraft taxiing, jet exhaust blowing, there is a level of experience there and awareness that those sailors need. And whether or not the reduction in flight hours is not getting those sailors the reps and sets that they need as pilots and aircrew do, I can't answer that directly. But there is appear to be a correlation that we need to get after and provide those sailors the opportunity to do the job we expect them to do in the environment in which they need to perform with the right tools and experience to succeed.
Admiral, thank you for your answer. General Bunch or Harris?
Sure, I'll go first. I'll hit a couple of the modernization things, and I'll hand it over to General Harris to go into some of the other details. Safety is our #1 priority. The safety of our aircrew is critical, and we need to take every step we can to keep them as safe as possible. This is a risky business. We don't need them having undue risk, though. We need to make sure we're doing those things. We're putting a lot of work into the program offices to make sure we're focused on giving the aircraft, making them available, attacking sustainment issues, to keep the fleet viable and provide the aviators the opportunity to fly and get the training that they need and be sure that they're proficient and make sure that we're able to turn aircraft. Each case is, unless it's on in a platform, an incident is its own incident. It has to be investigated, as has been said previously. As we identify those things, though, we work with the program offices to aggressively and rapidly address those actions that have been identified that we need to take steps on. A couple of areas where I think it shows that we're trying to move more forward in that. We've recently worked with the JPO, and the Navy's worked with us. We're pulling auto ground collision avoidance system to the left in the F-35 because collision with the ground is a key area. That's a program that we've got funded and we're getting started, that we're moving forward to take that step. In the F-16, the post-Block 40 F-16s, we've had 7 times that's activated to save aircrew. 8 lives, we believe, have been saved thus far, and we're trying to make sure we get that into the F-35, our newest fighter. The other one that I would bring up in that area is we're working on the pre-Block 40s. Those are the older versions of the F-16s that many of our reserve components fly, as well as some active duty units. We're entering into a program to get that mod put into that system to get it out into the field in the future and try to make sure we're taking that, which is one of our biggest reasons is a ground collision, that we're trying to take that out of the equation to make our fighter aircraft safer.
Chairman Turner, sir, thank you for your question, for highlighting our shortcomings in this area. Safety is our #1 concern, and readiness has been the focus of where our Chief, General Goldfein, and Secretary Wilson are taking us. To that end, we have aligned our FY19 budget requests with both the National Defense Strategy and our readiness efforts to make sure that we can accelerate what will be a multi-year climb to get back to being ready. Those scenarios will drive our airmen into scenarios for the high-end conflict that can actually be tougher than the conflict we're in today. But that doesn't explain that all the training accents we have, which are coming across, some from inexperience, but some from some of our highest qualified aircrew, and we suffer with each one of those losses. Our readiness recovery strategies focus on disciplined investments that cover our critical skills availability, so our people, training resource availability, the things they train with, the weapons support system, so across the WSS to make sure that the aircraft have the parts and that they're ready to go. Our flying hour program to make sure that each one of the airmen are flying the hours they need to stay, not just to be current, but to be proficient in the missions that we're assigning them to. And then also on the policy side, sir, the ops tempo and the training to make sure that the people get the time they need to both prepare to fly, and then also have the downtime that they need. So we're working on that. From our perspective, we appreciate the support that you have given us in both an increased budget with 18, and we are hopeful that you are supportive of our growth, because readiness, our number one concern right now is our people. We don't have enough airmen doing the job that we've got doing, so the growth is getting at the readiness. And we're also stepping out in the budget to recapitalize and modernize the fleets across what we're doing. So thank you, sir.
Ms. Zongas.
Thank you. I think you can see that the chairman and I share a real concern about the safety of aircrew, and that's why we're so concerned by some of the numbers. And I wanted to turn our conversation to the efforts related to the physiological events that have been of such concern to this committee. From our briefings, we know that numerous efforts are underway to reduce that rate of physiological events in the F-18 fleet. Specifically, the Navy is modifying the software for the environmental control system, installing upgrades to deal with icing in some fluid lines, redesigning 2 pressure valves, developing a cabin monitoring system, and installing an upgraded emergency oxygen system. However, I think there are some other efforts underway that I wanted to ask about. Admiral Grosklags, what is the status of designing a new onboard oxygen generation system? How do you imagine the timeline for getting the first one fully tested, and what are the challenges?
There's 2 efforts going on right now that are related. The first is for the T-45, actually, and we're calling that as a GGU-25. Excuse me. It's a replacement for the one they have now. It's largely intended as a reliability replacement with some improved performance, but it also provides a response to one of the key NASA recommendations, was that we provide a oxygen concentration scheduling capability in our Navy aircraft, which we do not have in any of our tactical platforms today. That will take us part way to answering that NASA recommendation. The next step, which is a combined T-45 and F-18, is to get to a MIL standard 3050. That's a very recent 2015 MIL standard, to get to a 3050 compliant oxygen generation system. That is something that we are going to compete between the 2 companies that are out there that do oxygen generators, because today there is not a system on the shelf that meets that new MIL standard. So we want to see what both of them have to bring to the table. For the first effort, we believe we'll be able to start installing that in our aircraft late next year, and it'll be the following year. Depending on what we get back from industry, it'll likely be the following year, so 2020, before we can get that new MIL standard compliant oxygen generator.
Along those same lines, where is the Navy with the plan to install the cabin pressure and oxygen monitoring system, and when will that, similarly, what would the timeline be for that?
Right now, the timeline for getting that into our F-18s is the 3rd quarter, so about a year from now, 3rd quarter of 19. In the interim, what we're actually going to do is install in a limited number of aircraft the same monitoring system, the CRU-123 that we put in the T-45s. That's not a good long-term solution for the F-18s, but it will start to, again, provide us some information like we're getting from the T-45s that will hopefully get us to some of the root cause of what's going on in the aircraft.
And the Air Force F-16s have had an automatic ground collision avoidance system for many years. And we know it has saved many lives, and in the past the Navy has resisted efforts to install a similar system on the F-18. Where is the Navy on this issue today, given the track record that it's demonstrated in the Air Force?
Admiral Conn answer.
I'll answer that. For the automatic recovery, for train avoidance is something that could be put in the airplane. Right now it's not funded. From a physiological episode, that's not what it's designed to do. We have not had a controlled flight in terrain in the F-18E or F in its lifespan, but it's something that we will continue to reevaluate whether to put that capability in the aircraft.
Thank you. And then in previous briefings and hearings on this topic, we've been told that the Marine Corps fleet of relatively old F-18 aircraft are not experiencing the high rates of events that the Navy's older F-18s have. So General Rudder, is that still the case? And if so, how do you explain it? Are there maintenance, operational, or reporting differences between the Navy and Marine Corps aircraft?
No, thank you, Congressman. We are tracking this right along with the Navy, and I believe, you know, if Clutch Joiner tells us to do something, we do it, and we jump and do it, and we're in step with the reporting procedures. This year, we have had only one in the F-18 and two in the Harrier. In years prior, most of our events have been pressurization issues in the older F-18, and we have reported and go through all the protocols that do that. I can't answer it exactly. I think if you look at the numbers, sometimes they get skewed with the training command and operational units and just where units are in the pipeline. But I assure you, whether it's a slapstick or Zorban tube, whether it's the working through the simulators, we're right in step with the Navy and everything that has to do with PE. But I don't have a great answer for you. But this year we're having another very low year with the F-18 so far. I knock on wood with just one F-18 event.
Well, that's good news, as long as it is the case that the reporting is essentially the same. I have another issue related to the F-35. Yesterday, there was a press report stating that DoD has stopped accepting deliveries of F-30 aircraft from Lockheed Martin due to a dispute over who will cover the cost of production errors in 2017 involving more than 200 aircraft. In the story, Lockheed Martin confirmed that deliveries have been suspended. So I have several questions about this report for General Bunch and General Grosklags. Is the report accurate? Is this report accurate?
So, ma'am, I will start, and I'll let Admiral Grosklags pick it up. It's a pause. I would not say it's a complete stop. There have been 14 block of the Lot 10 aircraft that have been delivered. There are a total of 5 aircraft that have not been accepted at this time. 3 of those are Air Force aircraft. 1 of those is from Norway, and 1 of those is from Australia. Those are aircraft that the program executive officer within his authorities has made that decision in coordination with Ms. Lord to make sure they knew what we were doing to address this quality issue. And we do not see it as a long-term problem. And if we have an operational need for the aircraft, we have discussed with Admiral Winter, and he's willing to entertain the idea that, and willing to work with us, that if we need the aircraft for an operational need, we will work with him to get those aircraft out of the hold that they're on right now.
And then what is the production defect in question? What is the issue here?
Ma'am, it goes back to a corrosion prevention in one of the holes that was drilled that was not corrected, properly treated, that was found during inspection at Hill Air Force Base. And we're now working through how that made it out of the factory and what we were doing to try to get that rectified in the fleet.
And why is there any question or dispute as to who is going to pay to fix it?
Ma'am, that's why I am letting Admiral Winter work that with the company, and he is carrying our water in that area.
Admiral Grosslags. So yes, the report is accurate. We know it's the defect. Anything you want to add?
Let me add, I agree with everything General Bunch said. We know what the technical solution is. This is purely about who's responsible for the cost. And I agree with Admiral Winter's decision at this point in suspending delivery of those aircraft. Because quite honestly, this was a mistake made by the contractor during production, and they should pay for that out of their bottom line, not our top line.
Thank you both, and I yield back.
Our questioners next are Cook, Gallego, and McSally. Mr. Cook.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This morning, we had General Mattis there, and I asked him some questions about the F-35, and it's kind of in line with what we were talking about. And this was about, our allies, so-called allies, that are purchasing F-35s. And, of course, the Canadians backed out of their deal. And then the question is about the Turks. And there's people on this committee and certainly the Foreign Affairs Committee that are concerned about the sale to the Turks. and how this would inflate the overall costs of the F-35, which every year that I've been in Congress, we're always talking about this is a big ticket item. And I think we've come a long, long ways. And unless we get this foreign military sales or anticipate what's going on this, we could have maybe they're not quite similar scenarios, but I think you see what I'm getting at. The general was very diplomatic in how he handled that question. I wasn't so diplomatic because I have some issues with the Turks, and but that could be a very real world scenario. Any comments on that, or you want to duck that one? It's kind of a political foreign affairs, but it affects the overall price based upon what certain allies do. Do you have a contingency plan in place?
Perhaps I could help, but perhaps if you could speak to the importance of our foreign partners, both in contribution of parts and in overall cost.
So, sir, overall, this has been a unique program from the very beginning as we formed it with allies who invested all the way along. They've been there for the entire development, and we've done it in a completely different manner than we've done previous programs. There's no other program that I'm familiar with my experience. Admiral Grosklags maybe have a different history than mine, where we've had the partners in and as voting members from the very beginning and contributing so much to the development of a platform. So if they pull out or if something changes in those scenarios, there would be an impact to us. Each country contributes a certain percentage. We'd have to go back and look at those percentages. They have a certain number of aircraft they're supposed to buy in certain years, and we would analyze that, and then we would make decisions on how we, the U.S. government, will work with the other partners to make up any differences and how we would go forward, because this is a critical capability that we, the United States Air Force, are counting on for our ability to execute our mission for the future.
Thank you, General. Going back to the F-35s, and General, we've broached the subject with the Marine Corps about operating in an expeditionary mode. And recently, I was at 29 Palms, and that's an expeditionary airfield, and there was the wind kicked up, and then the dust storm kicked up. And I remember the last time I was there was an MV-22, and I mean, it was like Cook goes back in history to when he was infantry in Vietnam and the sand and all that crap. And I'm thinking, how is this $100 million aircraft going to exist in that environment, which is very comparable to the Middle East, Afghanistan, where you pick a country there and the climate. I'm very, very worried about that because maintenance just might be overcome by elements.
Thank you, Congressman. And we actually did take the F-35B up to 29 Palms, and it, we put the Alice system in a tent, and we operated out of that. And it actually, we almost lost the tent because of a dust storm up there, but the Marines held it down like good Marines, and we were able to continue to operate. Because we built the Stovall model, we're going to continue to operate that in an expeditionary manner. In fact, our concept that you're probably well aware of, the expeditionary air base concept, that's how we're going to survive in the future. And just recently, having our first 6 F-35s on the USS Wasp, we just executed some of these expeditionary distributed Stovall operations off that ship into a land-based system, keeping the airplane running, fueling it off at MV-22, hot loading it with a weapon system, and then taking right back off again into the fight. So we're going to continue to maneuver that concept and look for ways to enhance that ability to operate in these austere environments.
Thank you, General. And I'm optimistic. I'm just saying you're a lot younger than I am. And I don't want a repeat occurrence of the Harrier at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is going to land there, where a phone call had to go to the Marine Corps base so you could have the sweeper out there on Lyman Road so we wouldn't have any dust and particles. And when that happens at 29 Palms, you're going to hear from me, I guess. But thank you very much. I'm optimistic, but I'm always nervous about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this committee and other, in the full committee, we've talked a lot about something I think that particularly scares me, considering that we have some adversaries that could take advantage of this, is the lack of munitions in our stockpiles. Specifically because we're drawing so much of our munitions out from CENTCOM, for CENTCOM, that we're probably diminishing in other areas. So I guess my question is, can I just get an update on where we are in terms of our stockpiles and munitions? You could go by areas if you want, and also, do we have sufficient stockpiles, for example, in Asia right now? Should the balloon go up?
So, sir, here's Congressman. It's a great question. What I will do is give you a top level of what activities we're trying to do to replenish. I am reticent to go too far down exactly
Understood.
How we are in specific areas for operational reasons.
Yep.
We can do that in another forum if you would like. I'll talk about two weapon systems in particular for us: Joint Direct Attack Munitions and Small Diameter Bomb 1, both of which are weapons that are principally ones that a lot of people are being used and are getting a lot of use today. Over the last years, we've now ramped up JDAM production in coordination and in partnership with Boeing to the rate of 45,000 a year. That's the highest we've ever had that rate. And we are starting to put stockpiles back in, and we've got some we can give to sell to our foreign military sales partners. And there is some excess capacity there Boeing may be able to get out. We just recently got to that level, though, so I wouldn't be willing to commit that we'll be able to produce more than that, but we are now up to 45,000 a year. On the Small Diameter Bomb 1, that one is a weapon that when we did the full rate production decision for the Air Force, we were only producing 3,000 of those a year. Over the last 2 years, we are now up to the point that we're on contract to bring in 8,000 a year. So we have rapidly ramped that up to increase. That's another one that's been in partnership. So we're trying to increase those numbers to get those weapons up so that we can rebuild those. The piece that we have to keep in, that we have to remember and that we stress to our program executive officer, and he has done it without us even having to really stress it, you have to take a holistic look at this. For the JDAM, it's not just the tail kit, it's the bomb body, it's the fill material, it's everything associated with getting that weapon to be a weapon, not just a kit. Same with Small Diameter Bomb. And what we have done, or I have done, is gone to the vendors and said, if you run into an issue with your subs and they are going to be a problem, I cannot find out about it late. You have to tell us so that we can work as a partnership to get that problem solved so that we can keep weapons going forward, because we are expending so many today.
Admiral?
From a PB-19 perspective for the Navy, and under the same restrictions that Lieutenant General Bunch mentioned, for us, our investments is going after some high-end weapons for the high-end fight. LRASM, ARGM, AIM-9X, SDB-2, RDT&E, as well as addressing some of our PANMIC accounts. Our JDAM, APKWS, and the funding profiles will get us to what we'll call our total munitions requirements on our carriers throughout the FIDIP. One thing that does not fall into WPN is our sonobuoys. And we are expending more sonobuoys than we planned for across the globe. So we would ask your support for all the investments we're making in PB-19 for our sonobuoys to include the unfunded list.
We've seen this actually, let's call it shortage. Have we seen this shortage actually have an effect on live fire practice or exercises?
For our non-combat expenditure allocation, we are shooting. That's a firm belief we have in naval aviation, is the value of live fire end-to-end validation of the weapon system itself, and then the air crew's ability to execute that or deliver that weapon in accordance with procedures. We have some weapons that are getting ready to demill, and we're going to shoot them instead of demilling them.
That's a good idea. Lastly, and this could go for everyone, how comfortable do we feel being able to move munitions from one theater to the other quickly and efficiently should the balloon go up?
Moving munitions is not an easy task because of the explosives associated with that, so we prefer to pre-position them. And our FY19 plan that we started earlier in 18, thanks to your help, is already doing that. So we are on a get well slope right now.
Anybody else? I yield back.
Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Harris, I want to talk about the A-10 rewinging. Go figure. So we've had a lot of conversations about this with Air Force leadership. We finally did get the resources to start the production line back up again in the funding bill. It's unfortunate that it closed back down. It's going to cost more in the long run to do it this way. But either way, in this year's funding bill, that's enough for 4 wing sets. The request for next year, we understand, is for somewhere between 8 and 12 wing sets. I know you were told there would be no math, but there's 109 left in the fleet that need to be re-winged. So at that rate, for between this year and next year, that's 93 to go. It's our understanding that Hill's maximum capacity is 32 a year. Is there some other reason why you're not asking for max capacity? Is it because we can't have that many in the fleet that are out for that period of time, just operational requirements? So that's my first question. And then how many aircraft will be grounded this year, next year, the year after? Your testimony says that you're asking for the wing program to avoid any further groundings beyond 2025. So can we get some specifics on how many aircraft will be grounded every year between now and then? And I know some of that's depend on operational tempo, but I also want to talk about what innovative things can be done to smooth that out, because as you know, certain squadrons are taking a beating more than others, and there are ways to smooth that out. So it's a lot of questions in there, but it's all about the rewinging.
Congressman, thank you for the question and for continuing to take care of the A-10 fleet. We do not expect to have any groundings for the A-10s based on the way we're flying them now, and we're rotating those that are close to being grounded into BAI status so we can preserve them. So we don't expect in the next couple of years to have an issue with that. Okay. We kept the production of new wing sets low. We kept it open with the 8 to 12 wings until we complete our studies. Many have been tasked through this committee to make sure that we understand where it is we're going with the profile. So until we have an answer for that to include the F-35 OT&E test and comparison, we're not going to make a further commitment until we know where we're going with both the A-10 and the F-35. So we will have to get back to you on a grounding per year per airplanes, and we'll
okay, so you said the next few years, but the testimony says to avoid any further groundings beyond 2025. So are you saying between the next few years and 2025, for sure there's going to be groundings unless something changes? The word further is jumping out at me.
Okay. We are not confident that we are flying all of the A-10s that we currently possess through 2025 with our plan. So as we are looking at our CAF roadmap and where we're going with our modernization program, our intent is not to have groundings that impact the fleet. So between now and 2025, we're comfortable. And as we said, we'll be flying the A-10, we expect, through the 2030 time frame, and we will make sure that we re-wing enough of the aircraft to have that capability and capacity.
So can I again read into that, because I know this is where we do differ. I mean, you've got in the testimony going down to 6 squadrons where there's currently 9 squadrons, and as you know, they're less PAA than the old squadrons had. They're down to 18 versus 24 PAA. From my view, again, for the millionth time, with them being south of the DMZ and deployed to Afghanistan and just coming back from Schwach and ISIS and working with our NATO allies and all that we have on our plate, 3 active duty and then 6 Guard and Reserve squadrons for a total of 9, like that's already stretching it for the types of capabilities that they bring to the fight. So how is it that we would provide that capability to the combatant commanders if we went down to 6? I don't see it. And, you know, we obviously mandated 171 minimum combat capability in the last couple of NDAAs. I expect a fight to continue to have that number in there as long as I'm around. So how does that square itself? Because we're at least you're all agreeing well into the 2030s, which I appreciate, and partnering with you on that. But it's the 6 versus 9 that I just think we're still out of sync.
Okay. Part of it, as we go from 9 to 6, if we execute the plan as we're studying right now, we will make the remaining A-10 squadrons healthy back to 24 PA. Some of the Guard units may only be able to get to 21 PA. So we're trying to fix the ones we have. I am not committing to well into the 2030s for the A-10. As I said, we'll fly the A-10 to 2030.
The Secretary said 2030. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So the got it.
Okay.
2032 is in the testimony, but okay.
And we continue to have a discussion and a study to look at. We are not walking away from the CAS mission, so we'll continue to keep at minimum of 55. We're trying to grow to 70 fighter squadrons, and we're looking at our ramp to get there. And as we bring in light attack, that can actually help relieve some of the requirements on the 4th gen platforms that we're seeing right now. The A-10 only does about 20% of our CAS missions. It continues to be a great airplane, and we'll fly it while it fits into our program, but it doesn't support the national defense strategy of our high-end fight for Russia and China, and we continue to make those choices and those discussions for our future modernization.
Right, and I very much support, obviously, the national defense strategy, but as long as we have Americans on the ground in harm's way, in certain circumstances, we need the best capability overhead to get them home alive to their families, and we know that this is a unique one that does that. So thanks, I'm out of time.
We're going to have a number of provisions that are informational provisions concerning the A-10, and one of the ones is going to go directly, obviously, to what Ms. McSally said, and that is, since the production line was shut down while Congress was deciding whether or not the A-10 was going to be preserved, someone made a decision that cost the American taxpayer an enormous amount of resources, and we're going to be requiring an assessment of what that was. So as we deal with these issues in the future, hopefully at DOD, someone will understand that until Congress takes action, they ought not take action that affects the American taxpayer until the debate has been completed. I'd like that assessment because I would like that figure to be known so people know that contrary action really does affect the taxpayer. With that, we're going to Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my question is for the Navy and Marines. I recently had the opportunity to visit the Naval Air Station, Oceana. Great facility, and really excited about what the men and women there are doing. I met with the commander of the Strike Fighter Wing, Atlantic, and had an opportunity to tour the hangar and the other spaces that are used by the Strike Fighter Squadron 106. We talked about the Hornet and the Super Hornet, and I see that in the budget request for fiscal 19, we're looking for, the request is for additional F-18s as we wait for more F-35s to come online. One of the issues that came up during my conversation and my observations at Oceana is that the supply shortages, and if we're looking to extend and increase the use and demand on the F-18, then the question is, where are we? What's your assessment about the supply chain? For those F-18s that are non-mission capable, are we attributing more to supply versus maintenance? Understand there's continues to be cannibalization that is happening. When I was an Army aviation pilot, I don't know what the official policy was, but we never cannibalized. But I get that you've got to do that. It's not good for keeping aircraft up. It's not good for morale, for maintenance personnel. But I'd like if you could just talk to supply and cannibalization, particularly as it pertains to the F-18. Thank you.
Sir, I'll start, and then perhaps Admiral Conn will jump in with something I may have missed. Not mission capable for supply is our #1 driver for readiness on the F-18, particularly the E&F. You are well aware that we've underfunded those accounts over the last 7 or 8 years. The average over the last 8 years, we're funded to about 72% of the requirement across 8 years. So you can see how over time that would build up a very significant deficit in our spare support for that platform. Starting with the RAA and FY17 and continuing into fiscal year 18 and now into our PB19 budget request, funding for all of our aircraft, not just E&F spares, has been increased dramatically into the 90, 95, almost 100% range across each of those fiscal years. That will take a little bit of time to have some effect as we have to go to industry, put those on contract and get them delivered. But that is our primary effort at going after the spares shortage. As you said, there's far too much cannibalization going on, but we can't really blame the squadrons at this point because that's what they're using to get their other jets up. So it's incumbent upon the rest of us to give them the resources they need in order to get those aircraft back on the flight line, and the additional supply money will be a big part of that.
The only thing I would add is it's not just about the APN-6, the new parts. It's making sure we can repair the parts we already bought. And with the investments we have in our APN 7 accounts to make sure our FRCs have the right tools, the right benches to be able to turn around those parts is just as critical. That those FRCs have that equipment and the tools to turn around the parts we already bought. Because quite frankly, those parts are cheaper than the new ones. And I think it's about 30% of the parts that we need in the fleet. The cannibalization rate, you're exactly right. Not only is it a bad way to do business, it takes twice the time because you got to take the part out, then you got to put the part back in, and the sailors are doing twice the work for one job, and there's a risk when you cannibalize that you break the part. As I think you're well aware, sir. So this is an all-in strategy. You know, the investments we made in parts in 17 will reach in full in 19. The investments we made in 18 will realize that full effect in 20. And then 19 will be full effect in 21. There's other things we have to do before those parts show up. And supply chain management is one of those, making sure we get the right parts to the right aircraft to get them in the air. And part of that is tied to the Vision 2020 that Admiral Grosklags mentioned in his opening comment about supply chain management, predictive maintenance, and use of data analytics to make those good choices throughout the process.
Thanks. And just with the 30 seconds I have, I'll get parochial at Pax River Naval Air Station, do a lot of research, development, testing, et cetera. We've got an aircraft prototype facility. They're waiting for funding, phase 3 funding. It's on the DOD's unfunded priority list, but not the Navy's unfunded priority list. So just like you to take a look at that, and we'll certainly follow up with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Conn, you'd made mention of the tragic event where we lost some brave aviators down in Key West. I had occasion to meet with the outstanding command staff that we've got down there, and they took occasion while I was there to stress the importance of maintaining the military mission line so that the Navy can continue their operations in the eastern Gulf of Mexico free of the congestion that the erosion of that line or the movement of that line could create. The Air Force has stated under the signature of General Goldfein that unequivocally the Air Force opposes any change to the military mission line. Does the Navy hold a similar view?
I apologize, sir. The mission line for?
The military mission line that preserves the eastern Gulf of Mexico for training, test, and evaluation missions that benefit both the Air Force and the Navy. If it's something you'd like to get back to me on, that's fine.
I don't want to. Let me get back to you on that, sir.
Sure.
Make sure.
Yeah,
I understand
my question is, do you have a different view of the Air Force since the Air Force has been unequivocal in this? Have I mischaracterized the Air Force's position, General Harris?
No, we unequivocal. We need to protect those range assets.
I would agree with that.
Wonderful, thank you. General Bunch, when we first met, I was a country lawyer running around Okaloosa County, Florida, and you were doing great work at Eglin Air Force Base, guiding our community through an EIS process where we were anticipating a certain number of Air Force variant F-35s along with variants for the Navy and the Marines. The Navy and the Marines have made other plans. They're going elsewhere, and our current EIS caps the universe of Air Force variants that we can have of the F-35, and we have these unfilled slots for the other branches of our services. Does the Air Force believe that refreshing that EIS to reflect the need for more Air Force aircraft at Eglin could help us save money, could be advantageous, or do we live under the current EIS forever?
Sir, if you don't mind, I'll speak to that from
Certainly.
a plan perspective. We are looking at that. As the F-35 community grows, our ability to get trained aircrew pilots, in this case through, we're looking at both the airplanes that are possessed there, which are some of the oldest in the fleet, looking at how we can modernize and refresh those, along with looking at the EIS, because it's limited to 59 total F-35s, and we recognize that there is some room to work. So we will take that through our strategic basing process and make sure that we get a good look at it.
So it is a goal then of the Air Force to have more of the F-35A variant allowed under that 59 cap?
I can't say it's a goal. It's something we're studying.
Great. And is there a timeline for that decision calculus?
Not yet, no, sir. We're looking at it. We still have room to grow at Luke, but as Luke fills out, looking at Eglin to make sure we've got the decisions made in time, if that's where we're going, that would have to be a couple years before Luke completes its build.
I would simply offer to you that when General Bunch and I went through that process previously, there were factors and circumstances that I think no longer would present a challenge to allow us to be able to fully utilize that Air Force asset to fulfill the mission. And Admiral Grosklags, I wanted to ask you about plans on the TH-57. The TH-57 fleet right now is old. The chairman, I believe, talked about training aircraft and what our plans were. Is there a replacement strategy for the TH-57?
There is. I think Admiral Conn can probably address this better than I can.
Wonderful.
Our strategy for replacing the TH-57 is to go commercial off the shelf. We're going to buy a commercial aircraft and integrate it into the training down in Florida. That timeline will probably start in 20, where we'll start buying aircraft in 20 and be divested by the TH-57 by approximately 2023. We don't have to do any testing on the aircraft, so it's a buy and start flying.
I greatly appreciate that sense of urgency. I know at Whiting, we've got over 200 circumstances a year where a helicopter that takes off at the base has to come back on a truck for that purpose. Have we contemplated a strategy that would be turnkey training, or have we dismissed that as an alternative?
We have not. All options are on the table.
Okay, and what are you evaluating, or what can you share with me about where the Navy's thinking is on the benefits and drawbacks of turnkey training versus a procured and purchased commercial system?
I think the fact that we're getting ready to compete this, both the aircraft and then potential turnkey solutions, I'm hesitant to address the strengths and weaknesses at this point.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that as the RFP goes out, that it is sufficiently permissive, where if someone has a and I am not a partisan for turnkey versus a procured commercial system, I simply want to make sure that the Navy has both of those options to compare, and it sounds as though that's your plan.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. My question is for Admiral Grosklags. The Navy's Physiological events team, obviously led by Admiral Joyner, has been keeping us well up to date, as a matter of fact, on the progress with PE issues that her organization continues to look at, and you know, they take a holistic approach to examining those problems and obviously the solutions. My question to you is, can you speak for just a minute on the difficulties that the Navy could encounter if Congress attempts to legislate some specific mechanical solution rather than just letting the Navy continue to maintain its approach of flexibility as you learn and test new things?
Yes, sir. As you noted, we are taking a very holistic approach, and that was, I'll say, re-emphasized, if you will, to us by the NASA study last year, where they looked at what we were doing and said, you're actually focusing too much on just mechanical solutions, and you really need to get the aviator, the physiology, the operational environment into your considerations more than just fixing the eaches on the aircraft. We fully recognize we need to continue to fix each one of those mechanical things, if you will, that we've identified to date, and that Congresswoman Tsongas mentioned many of those in her opening remarks and her follow-on question. But there are other things that have been put on the table for several years now. Mechanical fixes that in the end, as we've examined them, have panned out to not be as valuable as originally thought. So the real focus that we have right now is on getting to the root cause of things and changing only those things that we have demonstrated by fact that impact the rate of physiological events. A very simple recent example. Actually, I can give you two of them very quickly. The software fix that Congresswoman Tsongas referenced, we introduced that to the fleet about 2 months ago. We had a PE on an aircraft about 3 weeks ago, I believe. That aircraft did not yet have that software fix installed. If it would have prevented that PE. There is a ram air dump switch that was inadvertently activated during one of our physiological events. When we looked at that mishap, we said, well, or that physiological event, we said, we're probably not going to change that dump switch location because of one PE. But when we looked at it further, when we pulled the string through that root cause corrective action process, it turned out that the pilots were hitting that dump switch many more times that weren't causing physiological events but had the potential to. So now we're going to go in and make a fix to the location of that switch to address that specific problem. Those are the kind of eaches that we have to get at while we're doing this, along with, again, the aircrew physiology stuff that NASA recommended.
I appreciate your answer. My worry is always when Congress gets involved and tries to legislate specific fixes, all it does is end up creating problems, costing money, and it's very counterproductive. So thank you for your answer. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our panel of witnesses. Thank you all for your testimony and for your service to the country. It's important with all budget requests that we really strike the appropriate balance between building and procuring new next generation systems and modernizing systems that still have plenty of life in them. My question is, how are you thinking about including game-changing capabilities such as directed energy weapon systems, which are low-cost, high-range, deep magazine-capable technologies, both from the outset in the requirements building phase, as well as through the modernization processes?
Congressman, if you don't mind, I will start with that down here from an airman's perspective. Because of the budget increases and what we're looking at are some of the gaps and some of the areas that we are not sure of if we can get further ahead than we currently are, we are making some healthy bets in some of those areas. The ones you mentioned, in addition to advanced computing, big data, artificial intelligence, robotics and autonomy. We are looking at each one of those and coming together as a group of services through CAPE to see how we can best pool our capabilities so that when one of us makes an advance, it applies and helps all of us as we move forward. Because each one of the services has a budget line to support those efforts, and we're figuring out what's our best way, because just going at things the same way of modernizing old stuff, it's still going to be old stuff, just going to last longer, but it may not be as effective as we would like it to be. So we are working in that direction to make sure that we do have game-changing technology headed our way.
Thank you, General. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll touch on two things. I'll stick with directed energy first. We're not pursuing anything that we can talk about here right now on aviation platforms, but we do plan to have a directed energy capability on one of our surface ships that we will have back out there in fiscal year or calendar year 19. So the Navy is pursuing directed energy, but right now it's more focused on our sea-based than our aviation platforms. The other place that I think, as General Harris said, we're collectively making significant investment right now is in hypersonics, not only in the defensive side, but also just as importantly, perhaps more importantly, on the offensive side of the house. And as he said, this is really about the services coordinating as opposed to going down an individual service path. And I think our service acquisition executives and our service secretaries have kept us very focused on that joint effort, joint pursuit of these new technologies.
Thank you.
I'll just offer for the directed energy thing, for this discussion, one of the things you're going to see very quickly is the counter UAS piece. So we're working through that right now. That seems to be proving very valuable as far as going against those type of systems. I'll also mention something a little more simple, and that's taking all the information that is being derived from the F-35 series of aircraft, and what do you do with that information? And there's several different efforts out there right now to take how to take all the waveforms and condense them into the ability to get it down to the corporal on the ground. And we've doing some experimentation right now out at our Weapons and Tactics Squadron with tablets, and using the ability to use tablets out on the battlefield. So the goal would be, if you look into the future, is that corporal, that squad leader that's going into the objective area, on his tablet, he's got the same information that the F-35 is seeing or any unmanned system in the area is providing to him.
Very good. Thank you, General. So I'm interested in addressing the pilot shortage as well, particularly combat pilots, which is most acute, I know, right now in the Air Force. Though, if time permits, I'd like to responses from each of the services. My understanding right now, reaffirmed by a GAO report released yesterday, is that pilots are leaving for the civilian sector not because of pay or promotions or op-tempo in the service, but primarily due to career dissatisfaction from the lack of flying when not deployed. So I'm sure you have your own analysis as to why good combat pilots are leaving, but what do we need to do to keep them?
I'll go first. One, we are in a war for talent for our folks that fly our aircraft. They are going to the airlines, they're going to med school, they're going to law school, they're going to get their MBA, and they're starting their own businesses. My focus is on reducing distractions, and one of those distractions is not flying enough, particularly in our maintenance and basic phase, where we're struggling with our readiness. We're putting the folks forward with the proper readiness, training, and certification, but it's at the expense of folks on the bench. And that's what we have to fix through our readiness accounts. The GAO report, the only thing that I'll say from the Navy perspective and the shortfalls they addressed, it's not from a retention shortfall, it's from our T-45 challenge of shutting down T-45 operations, taking a pause, and that's causing a shortfall in the fleet. Today it's about 70 pilots short for 58 squadrons. Yes, that'll increase to about 160 short in FY19 for those 58 squadrons, but we're going to have to work our way through that T-45 pause through manning actions, increasing tour lengths, and as well as taking risk in manning levels for those squadrons in the maintenance and basic phase.
And Congressman, if you don't mind, I'll add to that. I would second what the Admiral has said about the why the pilots are leaving. Ours are very similar from an airman's perspective, and this is a very talented pool of people who, if we give them the right circumstances, will stay longer and do what we need in our nation's defense. So we're working that. To help, the Air Force has stood up an Aircrew Crisis Task Force that's looking at each one of these topics. It's partly on retention, partly focused on bringing in new pilots in a bigger quantity, because this is a national crisis. You're seeing it first in your services, but you're going to see it very soon in your airlines, where there's just not enough pilots to go around. As the airlines are hiring 5,000 pilots a year, and us at the table are only producing 2,000 a year, there's going to be an issue. So you'll see it first in your regional, then moving up to your bigger aircraft, and just the availability of pilots writ large. So we will solve a portion of that and try and keep those pilots under, a highly demanded skill set in our services longer across all three of us.
Is there a plan to widely distribute the findings of the task force? What is going to be the result of that?
Yes, sir, but it's not just an Air Force piece. We are doing this with the services that you see at the table, but we're also working with our commercial industry to figure out how can we solve this together as a national problem. So as we get to completion and we look to funding what we can to solve some of these issues, if it's a funding issue or freeing up white space or getting more aircrew available so that they can focus their time on the flying rather than doing additional duties that don't necessarily improve their combat capability, we will certainly share that information.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all, and I yield back.
Turning to Ms. Zongas for closing comments.
I just wanted to thank you all for your testimony and for your service, and Admiral Grosklags wanted to especially commend the Navy for finally taking a look at the human physiology, the human being who is the aircraft crew as you're addressing the issue of physiological events. I'm grateful the NASA report focused on that and that you've taken it seriously. So thank you all for your service and for being here today.
With that, we'll be adjourned.